ago, we talked about anxiety, some of the practical ways to deal with anxiety, and how you can incorporate little movements in your own life to really circumvent some really bad anxious thoughts. I mentioned The Anxious Achiever was a book that I was finishing up, just finished it, and wanted to share some of the tips that I got from it, my overall thoughts of the book, and share with you what we can get out of it and how we can function a little bit easier within this world. And that's what we talk about here on this channel. There's so many documentaries and movies and books out there in this world alongside global events and our day-to-day life that offer a great deal of knowledge and information, and that can affect our lives in a negative way or a positive way, or can inform our own decisions. There's many people who make decisions that will affect our lives, but the most important decisions are the ones that you make, and making better ones really is the goal to get you closer to the person that you want to be. So, The Anxious Achiever, what did I get out of it? Quite a bit, honestly. There is a great deal of anxiety that exists in the workplace. If you are someone that's super driven, or somebody who has worked with people who have a lot of thoughts and opinions and big personalities, you have definitely understood what it means to feel anxiety of, did I say the right thing? Did I not? And going into these spirals. And that is a big thing that she talked about within this book, and first starts off with some of her own story. And it's pretty interesting to hear how much she has gone through and how successful she has become on the other side of it. She was really a big part of capturing social media at the start and made an entire career out of digital marketing. And it's pretty impressive to see, and that there was shortcomings along the way that she turned around and was able to learn from and shifted into the next version of who she was and who she is. And she is also a mom and a wife and a mother of 3, as well as running multiple companies. So pretty impressive, and can very much see why there's a lot of anxiety associated with living that kind of life. But she starts off with talking about what anxiety is and why some people might feel it. And she does do a good job about exploring childhood issues and how that could be where anxiety is coming from. You don't know how a parent's going to react. The situation that you grew up in was turbulent, so you didn't know which version of yourself you needed to be to circumvent or go around and navigate certain situations when you were a little kid, and that stuck with you. She mentions the Shopify CEO who had a pretty turbulent childhood. They didn't grow up with a lot of money, and he created Shopify to make money while he was in school. And then, of course, Shopify has become what it is now. So pretty impressive to see people take really tough scenarios and continue to struggle with it along the time. She does very straightforwardly say that therapy is helpful, and there's various types of therapy that she mentions, including cognitive behavioral therapy, but there's also other types of therapy that you may or may not have heard of. Cognitive behavioral therapy is looking at what you are doing and how that affects how you're thinking and how they are connected. And then there's a few other types of therapy that she goes into, which is pretty cool to show that, hey, this is something that you can deal with in some ways, but you do want to seek out people who are trained in this and can help you in a more legitimate way, in a more specified way, because every situation is different, and there's a lot of different things that can feed into what you're currently experiencing, and the best place to do that is to explore it for yourself. So there's a few general things that she talks about, which is nice as well, and that's part of the part 2 of her book, where she goes into like legitimate things and worries that people who have anxiety go through, and a few of them being stuff that if you are an anxious person, you have definitely felt or experienced, including negative self-talk, thought traps, unhelpful reactions and bad habits, perfectionism, control, feedback, criticism, and imposter syndrome, and social anxiety. These are pretty much like an overview of all the different ways anxiety can show up. And I want to focus on the idea of perfectionism, which if you struggle with anxiety in the workplace, is something that you're probably facing, and you might be thinking, I don't struggle with being perfect. I know that I'm not, and therefore that's what is causing the anxiety. And that really is what perfectionism is you think that you're never good enough and that you're striving for something that you feel like you can't ever really achieve. And there are a few different things that happen when you're stuck in this idea of perfectionism. It's this idea of mind reading. You're trying to figure out what these other people are thinking or doing based off of the slightest interactions that you can have with someone. And of course, that could be leading back to what happened to you within childhood. If you had a parent that you had to be very aware of their emotions, you may have carried that with you throughout your life and is something that you are constantly referring back to as a way to feel safe. And that is really the basis of the issue of anxiety, is you don't feel safe and secure in your own space. So you're trying to control everything outside of you. And realistically, we cannot control what is happening outside of ourselves. We can't control what people think or do or want or say. We can only control how we're dealing with it. And therefore, we can only deal with our own emotions. And you want to build up the inside so that whatever happens on the outside, it doesn't shatter and cause you to go back to the default of this version of you that no longer is serving you. So mind reading is a really big thing that many people that struggle with that type of problem or that type of anxiety is mind reading. You're trying to figure out what other people are thinking. Oh, they didn't answer after a few minutes, they must hate me. Or you're trying to evaluate other people's actions based off of what you did to see if you can figure out what you did wrong. And therefore, if you figure out that you did do something wrong that caused that person to act a certain way, then you know not to do it again. So in some ways, that can be helpful, but oftentimes it's applied in situations that aren't actually helping us. How many times have you sat and questioned over and over and over again, well, why didn't this person text me? They didn't text me back, and you're just freaking out. And there is a great deal of anxiety that comes with that. And then you're spending hours and hours wondering and thinking, and then they do text you, and now this whole spiral starts again, because what are you gonna say next? Is the next thing I'm gonna say gonna cause them to never speak to me again? And that leads you into the idea of catastrophizing, which is another part of perfectionism. Catastrophizing, you are thinking about the worst possible scenario that could happen to you and falling into this trap of constantly thinking about it. Oh, I sent this weird text. Oh, I sent it an hour later than I usually respond. They hate me, they're not gonna speak to me again. My boss was in a bad mood and I didn't say that funny joke in the right way. I'm gonna get fired. And you are going to the worst case scenario constantly. And now a great deal of what she says is that when we are catastrophizing, we're thinking about the worst possible thing, and that most of the time it's not gonna come true. That person probably doesn't hate you. Your boss is most likely not gonna fire you if you were late on one thing or you said something slightly weird. It's probably not what's gonna happen. There's probably going to be smaller repercussions, if any, that are gonna happen first. And another big thing is should statements. Should statements seem to be something that is surrounding the world constantly. Everyone is telling you, you should be doing this, you should feel this way, you should be doing that, you should get married soon, you should have done the project this way, you should have said this. And this should statement is constantly forcing you into a narrative of feeling like you're not enough and that you'll never be enough and that you can't do enough because you should always be doing something else. And when people are telling you this, you feel bad because you don't know what else to say to them and how to deal with it. But what happens when the catastrophizing or the mind reading and all of the should comes true? What if your boss does fire you? What if your friend actually never does speak to you again? What do you do then? Well, you realize that what happened isn't a reflection of you just being this awful person that could never do a good job. And she mentions at the end of that chapter that she did end up having to leave a job because the client wasn't the right fit, and they both decided after a few weeks that once the contract was over, she was going to part ways. So in a sense, she was let go because of this feeling that she had, but was also true. So how do you deal with it when your worst case scenario does come true? And that is what I really want to talk about. And the rest of the book does give you pretty good insights into other ways to think about things and gives a word to a lot of the ways that you feel on a daily basis. Mind reading, avoidance. You're avoiding dealing with the situation, so you just take a full step back because you're too anxious to deal with it, so you avoid it altogether. You're catastrophizing. You're doing the should statements. So she does a great job at explaining the wording behind the feelings that you're feeling, and once you are aware of something, you can actually deal with it. But what happens when the worst case scenario befalls you? What do? Were you actually mind reading and telling the future, and now you're finally right? Were you prophesizing? Were you creating this idea and then making different scenarios in your life to make that come true? Well, it happened to me. I did get let go. I did have friends just stop talking to me out of nowhere after I felt that I was acting different or that my text came a little bit later. And how did I possibly deal with that? Considering I'm an anxious person in general, having the worst case scenarios happen to me, and mind you, they all happened within a few days of each other, lost the job and then lost the friendship on top of that. And then the other friends that I did know were very weird and didn't really know how to show up for me. So it felt like I was cut off from the world that I knew, didn't have the support from a majority of the people. I did have a few people who were very close to me, who showed up, who answered the call, who listened to me cry, who listened to me question and wonder and ruminate. And what did I learn? How did I get through it? How did I come out on the other side? And I am still going through on the other side. It's been about a month since all of this has happened. And I have really just learned that you will be okay. Not because you were able to outthink every scenario and because I thought that this might happen or always had the fear that this might happen, that I was prepared for it. I mean, I was doing that catastrophizing thing. I was like, this person's just gonna stop talking to me out of nowhere. My boss hates me. I always had that running in the background. But there's also a certain power that exists when you come to realize that that is true. When you come to accept that, hey, maybe this was always there, that this anxious feeling that these people caused in me was never going to be sustainable. And I was already on the outs of this place and these people, and my worst case scenario did come true, but it also felt like it had come true a long time before that. I felt overworked. I felt like I was too in the middle of doing so much, and that the people that I was surrounded by, as much as I did care for them at the time, were not doing well for me. And I can just see that based off of videos that I see of myself from a few years ago, and that there was a light in me that I just don't see anymore. And I'm working on getting back to that. And I think that's what anxiety can do for you. And when it feels super amplified, as much as there are little ways to go around it and to take it back, to take your power back, you also have to consider that if you're in an environment that is always making you anxious, that every time you send that text, you think someone's gonna stop talking to you, or if you word something weird, they're never gonna speak to you again, or if your boss makes you feel like you're never doing anything right and isn't actually giving you any direction, that this might not be a place that you can thrive in and that you can be yourself in. And that really is what anxiety is trying to show you, is get out, just move on from the places when you can to relieve yourself of that feeling, because it's not fair for you to feel this anxiety all the time. And that is really how I woke up every day for 2 years, was under this constant anxiety of like, I don't like where I'm going. I'm questioning every single decision, every comment, every every choice, every movement, I'm questioning in it, I'm wondering about it, and it took so much brain power and was the reason why I had to stop making videos, and I just didn't have the bandwidth. And if you do feel that anxiety has taken that much from you, yes, you can go to therapy and you can get better tools and you can read the books that explain what you're going through, but sometimes you just actually need to leave the environment and the people that are causing that from you. And sometimes you might say, I can't leave, they're my parents, they're my siblings. You can limit your time though. And if this is someone that you have a really close relationship with, you have to do the evaluation of, is this good for me? We spend a lot of our time at work and at home with our partners, and we have to take into consideration the reality of that situation. What is it doing for me? Is it serving me? Am I getting joy out of being here? And if the answer is constantly no, or the yeses are so much smaller than the no, I'm not happy, you really need to take a step back and reevaluate. And that is where I was left with. I was in the process of making the decision to move on anyway. They made the decision for me, and it really didn't make sense to me at the time. I don't think I'll ever understand why. They couldn't explain it either. And I'll never know why the people that I was so close to just cut me out, and that's okay too. That anxiety didn't disappear. I woke up many days. That's why I couldn't get out of bed for a lot of days this past month. I didn't know how to deal with it. I didn't know how to process it. I didn't know how to share. I didn't know how to talk about it. I'm not currently in therapy, but there are tools that I am using, like the ones that I mentioned in the last video. I'm also doing a lot of writing, trying to focus on the future, and that is where I am trying to spend most of my time. And I completely get that if your worst case scenario does happen, you are also stuck there, that you're thinking about, well, what did I do? How do I get through this? And sometimes the past has done all it can for you and you can't learn from it anymore. The past has brought you here, and that's quite literally all it can do for you anymore in most scenarios. I could mine or try to mine all of those past communications, relationships, all the texts, all the calls, and every time I made a decision and say, oh my God, like I could have done this or I could have done that, and I can't go back and change it. I don't know why all of this befell me the way that it did. And at the end of the day, I have to just keep moving forward. It's not always easy. Most of the time it hasn't been. And it's hard to face the reality of what's going on and the anxiety that comes with that, and just replaying to yourself that you're okay and whatever happened has happened. You can move on from it. You will move on from it, but only if you choose to. And many months from now, I hope to look back at this time period and look that I chose myself after so many people couldn't choose me, and to say it was hard. It was hard to just smile and brave through it, and to just let people go as much as I needed to as well. The people who couldn't show up, I had to let go of them as well and choose myself. And that is what anxiety really comes down to, is can you choose yourself in this moment over the fear, over the anger, over the guilt, over the shame? Can you center back to who you are and understand that you are okay, and that whatever you're going through, you can get through it? And that is really the heart of it. You need to go through. You can't get stuck in it. And that is what anxiety wants you to do. It wants to paralyze you into the moment and solidify whatever crazy truth is happening. And if your worst case scenario came true, as much as it is difficult, you can get through it too. And the anxiety will only amplify, but you are the one that gets to discard it and to say, enough is enough. The worst case happened, but I'm still alive. And you can fall back onto being grateful, and you can fall back onto better ways to cope with it. And if somebody or someplace or something doesn't want you, I want you to know that somebody somewhere out there does want you. And when everything fell apart and someone left your life, you lost something major, think about what was left. Who was there? Did somebody that you were close to answer the call? Focus on those people and give them the time and attention, and give yourself the space and the freedom to grieve what you've lost and what you've understood about your life. Because when something like that happens, you're not only grieving the past, you're grieving what you thought your future would be. And there's a lot of grief associated with anxiety that isn't talked about, wasn't necessarily mentioned in the book, but grief is something that we are pervasively dealing with all the time and are constantly going back to. That loss that you feel is grief because you thought your life was going to go one way and it didn't. Or you thought your life was supposed to be something and it wasn't. And that is all grief. It is all just this sadness that you have to deal with and face, but it is up to you whether you stay there or not. And yes, there are going to be days where you can't get yourself through it. You're going to cry and you're going to scream, and those feelings won't kill you. The feelings of being anxious, of feeling your heart beat faster, of feeling like there's no end in sight are all feelings that won't kill you, but they can keep you there for a long time if you allow them to. So choose not to let them do that. Anxious Achiever was a pretty important book. Check it out if you'd like to. Check out the podcast. I'll try to find links to both and put it down there in the description box. And let me know, have you gone through your worst case scenario? How have you dealt with anxiety? Do you default to catastrophizing and labeling and all the thought traps and the mind gymnastics of trying to figure out what people did or didn't, or what you should have done, or who you should have been? You can't change it, but you can decide what it means and turn that into the next version of yourself. The next decision matters more than the decisions they made that they tried to break you with. So you have the power over your life. You always have. I'll see you soon. Have a great week.